Thanks for clearing that up, Doug, that I'm not expecting. And it's actually my wife. She would probably really hate that you would say that I was expecting. There's no we pregnant, right? She's pregnant. You find that out very, very quickly. Yeah. Anyhow, it's a pleasure to be here. I didn't know if I was going to be able to be here in person, but it's always a pleasure of mine to get to speak to you folks about something I'm very passionate about, whether it's with municipal water interests, state water interests, or agricultural water interests, Department of Transportation, whatever. I am very, very big into using weather, especially long-range weather forecasting when it comes to risk management. And there are a lot of ways that we can do this. I know a lot of folks don't think us as meteorologists know what's going to happen in 30 minutes, let alone 6 months. And I get it. I do, you know. But I'm not about telling you what time is going to be the best time for your golf game tomorrow. I don't care about that. I care about getting close enough with this long-range weather information so you can actually use it. And again, you're never going to be perfect when you're talking about something 6, 9, 12 months down the road, but if you can at least get in the ballpark with this information, it can be very, very useful. And for right now, in terms of the way our weather pattern's been setting up, we've been doing okay. Okay? So let's talk about some maps up here. That's the last 60 days when it comes to moisture. And I say normal, I put normal in quotes because we never see normal. Average is a better word. Normal is we get too much and then not enough, and you divide by 2, and we never get that number anyway. So normal in quotes up there. But things have been pretty good across the eastern part of the state. Sangre de Cristo, San Juan's still struggling. That's obviously where the worst of the drought is right now. And that's where it's going to remain droughty because they just have a lot of ground to make up. And unfortunately, if you are bored with maps and charts and stuff, I'm going to bore the hell out of you here for about the next 15 minutes, okay? So, but I think a lot of the stuff that I'm going to show you today helps drive the point home of where we're going and why it's important to pay attention to this kind of stuff. So right now, a lot of the basins are in pretty good shape, but the ones that really need the biggest help are still struggling. Mightily because of the drought that has been going on. And if you heard me speak here last year, the drought shouldn't have come as any surprise. And that's something that I'm telling you. If you knew we were going to see a drought of that magnitude over a particular basin, would it be useful to you? Would it be useful to you 6 months in advance? What about 12 months? I think so. If you can get even just a 6-month advance notice on a drought like that, there's a lot of things you can do to plan accordingly. But right now, we're okay in a lot of those basins, and there's some that we obviously aren't. I'm sure a lot of you that pay attention to weather, climate, or whatever have heard about El Nino or whatever, and know that we were headed toward an El Nino event late summer and into the fall. That's pretty much gone. And what you're looking at right there are sea surface temperature anomalies globally. And across the west coast of South America, extending out of the Central Pacific Ocean. There's still some warmth there, but when you're talking about El Nino, you need the ocean to couple with the atmosphere to really get the pattern going. It kind of did that a little bit, but it really didn't do it like a traditional El Nino would, nor was it expected to. But the good thing is when the Pacific is warm, or at least warmer than average, we usually do okay in terms of moisture here in our state. It's when it gets cold, that's when we're talking about multi-year droughts. It will get cold again. We will see multi-year droughts around here. And to be perfectly honest with you, the Front Range isn't even close to being prepared for a multi-year drought. We have a multi-year drought happening in the next few years, Front Range is screwed, period. You look at water supply, you look how it's used, you look at how these multi-year droughts can set up. You want to look at a recipe for something like that? Look a couple states to our west into California and see what multi-year drought does to there. I think it's a good model. They handled it poorly, but it's something we can learn from, and it's something we can use these tools to see when that multi-year drought is coming. So what you're looking at here are sea surface temperature anomalies over the past several weeks, where you're looking at oranges and reds. That's where the water was warmer than average, blues, cooler than average, and you can see what's happened there. All of that warmer than average water has pretty much gone away with the exception of what's going on across the Baja of California and just off the west coast of Mexico, which is still, I believe, is significant because it keeps that Pacific warm, or at least warmer than average for us. This particular map shows depth. So from top to bottom, you go from 0 to 450 meters, and you could see all of that warmer than average water lurking beneath the surface. Horizontally on that graph, over here on the left is the western Pacific Ocean, over on the right is the eastern Pacific. So really the warmth has set up shop over the western Pacific. That's still somewhat significant. And while we may not technically be in an El Nino episode, as NOAA would define it, or the Climate Prediction Center would define it, I still think it's significant that that warmer than average water is out there and what it could possibly mean for us as we head toward the spring. And I'll share more about that in a second. All these different lines are just various computer models. I know it looks like a disaster, but the trend right there is that all of those lines, for the most part, stay above the zero line. And what that simply means is while we might not be in an El Nino event, it still keeps the Pacific warmer than average for a little while longer with no tendency toward it to go cooler than average. Cooler than average Pacific really gets us in trouble. Not just here in Colorado, but regionally. And I think that's something that when it comes to water planning, you really have to consider. It's not just right where you are. Water's regional. So if you have regional entities struggling, even when you may not be in a drought yourself, you may end up struggling as well. So I think it's important to talk about that on a regional capacity. I'm going to show you some computer model forecasts here about what could possibly lie ahead over the next several months. This particular one is the North American Multi-Model Ensemble. It's a conglomeration of about 10 different models looking at the same thing. All you need to know on these maps, brown is bad, green is good. And white is, I don't know, okay, to be honest. But in February, and you think of February as like, boy, east of the mountains, we don't get any moisture east of the mountains in February. February is a pretty dry month. Even some of the mountain locations, they tend to struggle from time to time, as we're just kind of caught in no man's land during the month of February. But you do see some green on the map right there across southeast Colorado and continuing across western Kansas. And to be honest with you, that kind of fits the pattern that we've been in, where the better moisture has been setting up east of the hills and across the plains. But something that I'm more focused on here is what happens as we get towards spring. And again, there's no tip toward wetter or drier than average right there for the month of March. A little bit of gray on the southeast part of the state. But again, I'm also kind of focused on, I'm not necessarily looking where the green is, I'm looking at where the brown is not. And I think in many cases that can be significant too. So if we're at least getting regular storms to come into the state, that's going to at least hold our ground as we head into the spring and could possibly deal with something like that in April, which late season snowpack is huge. It is huge. So if we don't see March and April snow, or even early May, because I never quit thinking about snow here until at least Mother's Day or shortly after, that can really set the table for us to do some good things. And you might say, well, that's a lot of green over the Four Corners area. And that's kind of what I'm talking about when it comes to regional in terms of moisture and whatnot. If we can get a storm track set up over the southwest, inevitably it's going to benefit us. There's May. Moisture continuing. If you look down there at the Baja of California and off the west coast of Mexico, you guys remember seeing that warmer than average pool down there? I don't think that you necessarily have to have an El Nino to do good things here. And I remember, do you guys remember the MedVet ad? Drove me nuts, man, during the fall. And they were saying, record El Nino, going to set record snowpack. I tell you what, man, as meteorologists, climatologists, whatever, and you hear that kind of stuff, you just roll your eyes when something like that comes out. Because they have no idea what they're talking about. They're just taking a headline and misusing it. But that warmer than average water off the Baja, I think is significant. I think it could help us out this spring. If we go into June, we're still recovering right there. Really? We're going to get that type of wet signal over southeast California, southwest Arizona, up into southwest Colorado in June? That's even ahead of the monsoon season around here. So there are some things here that these models are picking up on that I think is somewhat significant and even continues into July right there. And again, I don't care if the green is on us. I just am happy that the brown is not. And I think that's something that we need to consider when we're looking at these computer models. Even into August, I don't see any excessive dryness. At least this model doesn't right here, and we're going to check out a couple others as we go forward. This one I know is tough to look at, so bear with me. Again, the same color scheme here. Green is good, brown is bad. We got a lot of green. This is for March, April, and May. And if you look way up there and you see Colorado, Colorado's covered with green. So is New Mexico, Arizona, Utah. No brown during those months. Late season snow, early season rain go a long way to getting us through some tough times, especially if we can hold our ground as we go through February. Temperature-wise, we know that that's significant. If we have an active storm track around here, March, April, and May, we're going to be cooler than average. We have more clouds, the ground's wetter, it heats up less. So if we have a cool, wet spring, I think a lot of us could take that. And this model has been pretty much on board with that now for a while, as I've been watching the trends. If we go into summer, this is June, July, August, we kind of shut that moisture off over the southwest, but it never stays wet very long here. So that really shouldn't come as any surprise. It's how we use that moisture and how we use that snowpack, how we use that rainfall while it's here that sets us up for the times that are lean and when we don't. So again, not a tip toward dry in Colorado, just a tip toward maybe drier than what March, April, and May held for us. And then as we head into June, July, August, temperature-wise, you can see a lot of red on the map there. And I really hesitate to show temperature maps anymore with these models because they paint everything as warmer than average. They painted the Midwest as warmer than average. Yeah. 70 below wind chill in Ely, Minnesota the other day. And they've been cold up there for months. Computer models back in the fall, late summer, had them with this crazy warm signal up there. So again, because of the way the computer models and these longer range climate models are performing with temperature, I struggle with it. So I'm not going to show you a whole lot of temperature maps there because I think it's pretty erroneous. This particular model is from Europe. It's one of my favorites. That's why I'm showing it to you last. But that is the February forecast for Colorado and across the country. And again, no real tip toward warmer or I should say wetter or drier than average conditions across Colorado. But again, I'm really not that concerned with February. I'm more concerned with what happens in March. Now, in the southwest part of the state and in northern New Mexico, you do see a little bit of a dry signal right there. Nothing crazy, not like what's going on the west coast, but again, the pattern fits that the east side of the state, with the way things have been going, should stay wetter than average versus maybe the west side or the southwest side, which has been shorted a little bit. At least it's better than what it was, but it's still shorted. If we go to April, things start to fire up. And you hear me talk about regional stuff. The majority of the time, if we have a storm coming from the southwest, and it sets up in the Texas Panhandle, goes across northern New Mexico, a lot of times we will have to draw moisture up here from the Gulf of Mexico to make that storm tick. If we put moisture in the ground in Texas, in Oklahoma, we don't have to go to the Gulf to get that moisture. That storm sets up, it can draw the moisture that's in the air and out of the ground. It's ambient moisture that's present, and that's what really helps to make our storms tick around here a lot of times. You can still go to the Gulf to get the moisture, but you don't have to go as far if you have it right next door, and it makes things better. That's huge when it comes to thunderstorm season in Colorado. But for April, this is the third model that I've showed you that has us going on the uptick here in terms of moisture, not just here in Colorado, but also regionally. If we look at May, you can see the northern front range, a little more of a dry signal. The southern part of the state, a little bit wetter. Well, we need the moisture in the south and southwest. So if a place is going to dry out a little bit, I'd much rather have it be the north than the south, the way it works right now. And again, if you look down there in New Mexico and Texas, they're still putting moisture in the ground. Again, that's for May. That's what we look at for June. All models pretty optimistic in terms of our thunderstorm season going forward. Really optimistic states just to our east and southeast. If we go to July, That's monsoon season. You can see that green extending all the way down into central Mexico, coming up through New Mexico and right up into Colorado. And I'm a big believer, if we put moisture in the ground during the spring, we rarely have to worry about our thunderstorm season failing going forward. And a lot of that moisture at the higher terrain would obviously come in the form of wet snow, snowpack. So, cautious optimism. And I am not an optimist. I live just south of realism most of the time. But that drought monitor graphic right there is not an optimistic map. It is not. You got a long way to go in the southwest part of the state to recover from where we've been. But we're not talking about catastrophic multi-year drought here. I mean, last year at this time, and even a little bit before, we were doing okay, you know. But you take this no snow thing and go through the winter months for very long, and it sets the stage for some pretty bad times. So models and trends basically show support for a continued decrease in the dryness, and that's especially as we enter into spring. And I think, again, that late season snowpack is so huge. It's so huge, and if we can set up that southern storm track the way some of these models are looking at, I think it'll go a long way into erasing some of that drought. And a lot of people say, well, what if you're wrong? I don't care if I'm wrong. I really don't. I'm going to tell you what I think. And you're probably going to believe I'm wrong anyway, as a meteorologist. So the thing when it comes to risk management is nobody gets anything accomplished if they're sitting on a fence. If you go to someone and ask them a question, I need to know what you think. I'm going to tell you what I think. They come back to me and say, well, Brian, you were wrong. I'm like, well, you try to forecast the future. Okay? See how that goes for you. But I'm going to take the best group of not only trends and computer models that I can find, and I've been doing this a while, and there's some signals that I can look at that I know may prove to be a little bit more accurate than some of the models and what they look at. But I really believe in this using weather for risk management stuff. I've been doing it for agricultural interests for many years. And when it comes to drought around here, you can believe whatever you want to believe about when the next major drought is to strike the state, or whether it's going to happen or not. Well, I'll tell you, it is going to happen. And if you go back, and I've looked at records for forever, you know, going back into the late 1800s, which is kind of my thing right now. If you want to see drought, you go back to the late 1800s. And you see what a drought like that would do to not just the Front Range, but Colorado as a whole, but the region, if something like that happens. And nobody is prepared for that kind of thing. Nobody. I don't care what anybody tells you. With the amount of people we have and the population that we have and how much water we're using, it's that whole law of normalcy thing that goes on. Everybody's like, well, what's the law of normalcy? You ever watch the news? Have a shooting spree go through a neighborhood? What's the first thing the neighbor says that comes out? I never would have thought that would have happened in my neighborhood. Why not? That kind of stuff can happen anywhere. Historic records say drought of incredible magnitude can strike us here. And it will. It'll eventually strike us. So if we can use risk management tools that we have, especially something like weather and long-range forecasting to help mitigate that stuff, I think that's a pretty good thing to have. So I have my contact information up there. I know a lot of you have seen me speak before. A lot of you know how to reach me. If you're interested and you didn't get that, you can talk to Doug or whatever. But if you're not using weather in your risk management toolbox, you're messing up, in my opinion. So, again, thank you guys for having me here today. I'm going to hang around a little bit. If you've got any questions for me, just hit me up, okay? Thank you.
Brian, thank you very much.